In the first part, we explored how Howard Hughes revolutionized the film industry, leaving an indelible mark with classics like Scarface and The Outlaw. Yet, his ultimate passion was always to design and soar through the skies. Today, we delve deeper into the life of this maverick, from his record-breaking flights to his innovative contributions to aviation technology. Join us as we continue our journey through the extraordinary saga of Howard Hughes in Part 2. So he returned to the aviation industry and registered a company called Hughes Aircraft Company. The goal of his company was to build the world's fastest airplane. He built an airplane named H-1, which was ready after a year. The H-1 managed to fly at a speed of 566 kilometers per hour in 1935. Hughes, when he returned to his workshop, said, "We've built the world's fastest airplane. Now we want to build an airplane that can circle the globe in the shortest time." They got to work. Howard thought to himself, "If we build these airplanes from scratch, it will take too much time. Let's buy a good airplane and modify it." So, they bought one of the best airplanes of the day, the Lockheed 14, and started modifying it to be able to take off from New York, circle the globe, and return to New York. It could land in places to refuel, but time was of the essence to complete the journey as quickly as possible. Howard's modified airplane took off from New York and arrived in Paris after 16 hours, which was the fastest at the time. They had to refuel quickly in Paris before flying to Moscow. They reached Moscow and refueled again. This time, they took off for central Siberia to land at a small airport and refuel. The next destination from Siberia was Tokyo, then from Tokyo to Alaska, and from Alaska back to New York. This trip around the Earth took 3 days and 19 hours, which was a big news at the time. Howard Hughes was seen as a prodigious genius, which he truly was. By 1940, World War II had started in Europe, and America was quickly manufacturing weapons to sell to the Europeans. Of course, America also wanted to be prepared, so they told Howard Hughes Company to design military aircraft for them. Howard loved these tasks. He said, "Certainly," and started designing military aircraft from the morning. As we know, he thought ahead of his time, so the designs he made were mostly aircraft that could sit like a military ship on water and take off whenever they wanted. He had designed interesting ideas, but they didn't work with the technology of the day. He even designed a submarine that could emerge from the water and fly, something that still hasn't been made. As Howard aged, approaching his 40s, the obsessive gene within him grew stronger. As Howard's age increased, so did the gene. Howard was a busy man with several sensitive companies to think about, and in his aviation company, he insisted on testing every airplane himself because he believed others couldn't properly identify the faults. All these responsibilities increased his stress, and as you know, stress fuels other worries, so his obsession grew stronger and stronger. We reached July 7th, 1946. When the XF-11 aircraft was ready, Howard Hughes wanted to test it himself. He took off alone and flew without any issues for 45 minutes, but suddenly the plane's engine shut down. As an experienced pilot, he didn't panic and tried to restart the engine. While Howard was trying to restart the engine, the plane was steadily descending. Eventually, he couldn't restart the engine and, unable to find a clear area to land, crashed into a sports building and the plane caught fire. Fortunately, there was a crowd nearby. They helped pull Howard Hughes out, and since he was unconscious, they quickly took him to the hospital. In this accident, he suffered a brain injury and his neck was also damaged. Nevertheless, he was discharged from the hospital with severe neck pain and headaches, only being given 3 types of painkillers: codeine, Valium, and Emperin. These highly addictive pills were commonly prescribed at the time. It's hard to believe, but the pills that Howard was supposed to take for a few weeks stayed with him for the rest of his life, and he was never able to stop taking them. These pills not only ruined Howard's body, but also paralyzed his mind further, fueling his obsessive-compulsive disorder. He would wash his hands so much that they would bleed, yet he would still feel they weren't clean enough. During this period, his illness began to overshadow his genius, turning him from a prodigy into a madman. His employees had already started saying he had gone mad. He had no wife or children to help him, and if you suggested he needed help, he would say, "No, everything about me is great, why would I need help?" Howard Hughes was no ordinary man. He even had contracts with the US Army, so it wasn't like they could just let him be. The FBI was watching him from a distance, and everyone said the same thing. He had become paranoid, suspicious of everything. He had many girlfriends, most of whom were from his Hollywood days, but none of them could stand being with him for long. They would run away at the first chance they got, so his loneliness only added to his problems. His life became stranger by the day. For example, he rented a cinema in Hollywood to watch various films, and didn't leave for 4 months. He did everything inside that cinema, and since he paid the rent on time, they didn't kick him out. During those 4 months, he wasn't interested in food and only consumed water, milk, and chocolate, which he forced himself to eat. It was strange for a man who would wash his hands for 3 hours until they bled, to not wash his hands, bathe, shave, or cut his nails for 4 months in the cinema. Eventually, he left the cinema but didn't go home. Instead, he went to Beverly Hills, rented a room in a hotel, and returned to his obsessive habits, such as taking 3-hour baths and washing his hands for 3 hours whenever he did. Throughout this period, he continued to take those 3 painkillers. When Howard reached the age of 60, the pills no longer satisfied him, so he started taking them along with injecting morphine. At this time, there was an airline called Trans World Airlines, or TWA, in which Howard Hughes had a significant stake. It was the largest airline in the world at the time, but its owner was completely unaware of what he owned. In any case, in 1966, at the Beverly Hills Hotel, they called him and asked, "What's your share in TWA?" And over the phone, they bought his shares for $1 billion. That's a lot. $1 billion at that time was an amount no one else had, making Howard Hughes the world's first billionaire. You might ask, what about billionaire families like the Rothschilds or the Waltons? You should know that they are families, but this was just one person. Like Elon Musk, there are many billionaire families whose wealth surpasses everyone else's. But among individuals, Elon Musk is currently the richest man in the world, and at that time, Howard Hughes held that title. Anyway, he took that $1 billion straight to Las Vegas. But don't get the wrong idea, he didn't go there to gamble. Despite being ill and having various ailments, however, he was mindful of his finances, so he invested the money in various parts of Las Vegas, mostly buying hotels. Interestingly, he bought a modest hotel called the Desert Inn and declared that it was only for himself, intending to live there alone. He lived in this hotel for several years, but then suddenly disappeared. People thought he had been kidnapped, but after a few days, news came that he had bought a hotel in London and wanted to live there exclusively. He reached the age of 67, and because he had been using those destructive pills for 30 years, he could no longer walk. 3 more years passed, and his condition worsened. When Howard turned 70, he wanted to return to his birthplace, Houston, Texas, to see a doctor and get treatment. He boarded a plane to Houston, but a few hours after landing he passed away due to kidney failure. A sad end for an extraordinary genius. Since he had no wife or children, who inherited his wealth? He had made a will stating that $1.5 billion of his money should be given to charity for research on various diseases. He had donated $470 million of his wealth to the managers of his companies, those who had worked for him faithfully for decades. He had willed $150 million to his cousin, with whom he was close. Another $156 million was distributed among all his casinos, meaning all his cousins, nieces, nephews, and the rest. $150 million of his wealth remained, and he willed it to an old gas station owner in Las Vegas, a man named Melvin Dummer. Was this man his friend? No, he wasn't a friend. One day, Howard Hughes's car broke down in the Las Vegas desert, and Mr. Melvin stopped to help him. Seeing that the car couldn't be fixed, he towed it for over 200 kilometers to Las Vegas. When they arrived in Las Vegas, Howard asked Melvin how much he owed him for the help. Melvin replied, "Nothing, I was heading this way and I brought you along." Howard thanked him and said, "I'll repay you someday." And this $150 million was the repayment for the old